Everyone, and welcome to Spirit Focus with Robert Painley. Tonight, my guest is Chris Johnson, and Chris is an ordained pagan minister in the state of Florida. And you also come from a variety of backgrounds that we'll get into in a minute, but he's also the co-owner or one of the owners of Love and Light Spiritual Emporium in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. If you're in town, that's where I get a lot of my accoutrement for what I do on a daily basis. And I've used Chris as a resource on a variety of cases and clients that I've worked with. So let me introduce Chris to everyone. Chris Johnson, world out there in large world network land and on the internet. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So why don't you fill in everybody a little bit more about, because I think before we get into some of the things that got you to where you are today, I think one of the things that we want to kind of talk about to start off with here is maybe kind of a definition for people so that people kind of know where we're coming from. I call this Wicca 101 today. And okay. So as a kind of a basis tutorial, as you were, for to kind of get people involved in what you do. And,
okay.
I'm not Wicca, I'm not a Wiccan. And so I think you can, I think I don't want to embarrass Chris with my ignorance. But at one time, I think I walked into the store and I said something like, tell me about Wiccanism. And I was like, and that could be probably derogatory, and I apologize, but my knowledge of Wicca is limited. I think, as most people out there who haven't been exposed in some way is. And so I thought I wanted to take today's show and kind of give people a little bit of a basis in, what is Wicca as a starting point, and then we'll get into maybe your history a little bit.
Okay. Well, I guess first and foremost, what I would have to say is I do come from a hereditary tradition, meaning passed down through a family line. I was not born into it. I actually had a witch family teach me their practices and their traditions from their family. As far as a definition of Wicca, Wicca is basically an earth-based religion. It's a fertility religion, so we celebrate the seasons, the changes in seasons. It's usually polytheistic, meaning that we believe in multiple gods and goddesses. And we do find the sacredness in everything, and we look at everything in cycles of like life, death, and rebirth. We do tend to see the divine through nature. And as far as, is there a distinction between a witch and a Wiccan? Some people will say that Wicca, to be Wiccan, Wicca is more the philosophy, where it's like you're seeing the divineness in nature and you celebrate the seasonal changes, but you may not practice magic, whereas to be a witch is actually practicing witchcraft, which is the casting of spells. So most Wiccans are witches, but not all witches are Wiccans.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Well, that's perfect. Kind of like when I talk to people, I always talk about, all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are medium. It's the same practice, basically, in a way. But believe me, when Chris and I have known each other for a while, so I can make, Chris and I can joke around a lot, but I don't want to take away from the seriousness that I am serious about what Chris does and how he does what he does. He's been a big help to me through the years of what I do. So, thank you, Chris. But the second part of that is I think that people have a lot of misconceptions about Wicca in a lot of senses. And like, I get questions, every time I'm running to somebody on the street and, I tell them I'm a medium, the first thing I get is, hey, Robert, what do you got on me? You get anything about me? And I know I'm sure as a Wiccan, or as a witch, that you get the same types of what we would consider dumb questions that everybody asks all the time. But really, I want the people out there to know there is no dumb question. I mean, I would rather people ask the question than not ask, even though I have to say the same thing 50 times. It's easier that people kind of understand where I'm coming from. So Why don't we go there a little bit, and let's look at the dumb questions that people ask us from time to time.
Well, I prefer to look at them as basic questions as opposed to dumb questions, because I don't want to put judgment on what people don't know.
Right.
Yeah, God. Well, I always get, well, wait, don't you mean you're a warlock? No. Where the term warlock stems from, it's kind of in debate, but one of the beliefs is that it actually stemmed from an ancient Anglo-Saxon word meaning oath breaker, because a lot of times witches, when they would meet in their groups or their covens, they would take an oath to keep the practices and the identities and the locations that they would meet secret.
Okay.
So a warlock was technically somebody who was in the coven and broke their word, so they were an oath breaker and they didn't keep the secrets secret.
Ah, fantastic.
Another belief of where the term stems from, because it's not completely well known, it's kind of like up in the air in debate. So the other theory, I would say, as far as where the term warlock came from, is that they were people who during the Inquisition betrayed their coven and acted as if they weren't witches and outed other witches so that they wouldn't get caught. And so it was like they were waging war on their people and getting them locked up, hence the term warlock. So
Okay.
those are the two different theories of where the term stemmed from, which is actually a unisex term. So men and women are both witches.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I think that helps a lot of people. And also, let's get to what a coven is. It's a collective of witches, I would just assume.
Basically, yes. A coven is a group of people that a group of witches that will get together and they will practice either on every full moon, on the 8 major holidays of the Wiccan calendar, and they meet. It's kind of like a church getting together for a congregation, how like Christians meet on Sunday and they're the congregation. So
Sure.
a coven is technically, to draw a parallel, a congregation of witches, and they're usually led by a high priestess and a high priest.
Okay. And how are those priests and priestesses chosen?
Well, from my coming from a family tradition, it's kind of, we're all priests and priestesses basically.
Okay.
There's modern day Wicca, which stems from a gentleman named Gerald Gardner, who is considered the father of modern day Wicca. He is the one that brought Wicca into the mainstream when the anti-witchcraft laws were repealed in England. He had written a couple of books, and basically finally when it was repealed says, I know all of this is true because I am a witch, and he's considered the father of modern day Wicca.
Okay.
So he came up with, because apparently he learned from a family tradition that he had to keep things secret. So in order for him to share information, he kind of borrowed things from other traditions, such as the Freemasons and things of that nature. And he came up with a degree system. So when you first join a coven, in America, you're outer court, where you're learning the basics and everything like that. And after you study for a year and a day, because that's the minimum, is studying for a year and a day, if you've managed to learn what you need to, you get initiated and you're a first degree practitioner. And
Okay.
traditionally, and it varies from coven to coven, but usually in the first degree, you're learning like the goddess and female mysteries. Then after you study for a minimum of a year and a day, sometimes it can take longer depending on how fast you work, you can get elevated to second degree. And in second degree, you can start your own coven under the guidance of your high priest and high priestess, but you actually become completely autonomous once you become third degree, and that's when you become an elder and you can start your own coven.
Perfect. Interesting. So I think what people have to understand too is paganism, as Christianity would call it, and it was anything that was almost non-Christian, I would believe at the time, other than established religions, at the time, or people who used herbs or revered elders in some way, would be considered outside that mainstream Christian belief system, and were persecuted for centuries.
Well, the thing is that basically pagan used to just mean a country dweller. It was somebody who lived out in the country, just like the term heathen was somebody who lived on the heath. So so to refer to somebody as a pagan meant to refer to somebody out of town. And when Christianity started to become more of a mainstream religion, the thing is that it started in the cities and then eventually would bleed out into the countries. So that's why a lot of times, like when you would see paintings and stuff and depictions of witches, they were sometimes still depicted with like the conical hat on, which at one point was fashionable, but fashion trends would reach the country people later. So a lot of times they were depicted wearing still the conical hat because it was showing that the old religion or the old way of doing things was out of fashion or wasn't in vogue. And now the Christian religion is the new way to be practicing and worshiping. So yeah, pagan is actually an umbrella term that includes Wicca, and various other religions such as
Druid and yeah, correct.
Druid, Santeria, and everything like that. And then within Wicca, you even have various traditions, just like in Christianity, you have different denominations of Christianity.
Sure. Interesting. I think people find it fascinating when they meet a witch and they've never been exposed to it in some way. There's so many questions and there's a kind of a mystique about it in some way. What do you think that mystique comes from? Why do you think people have this mysterious connotation with it?
Partially through persecution from way back when.
Mm-hmm. Salem witch trials and things of this nature.
Well, even before the Salem witch trials, and the Inquisition. I mean, it was, a lot of churches were built on sacred pagan places where they would meet, and they would also make it sound like witches were using these horrible ingredients and stuff like that in their spells and incantations. I mean, it was a way of just really kind of demonizing the old religion.
Sure.
And I mean, because they would sit there and say, oh yeah, they use things like bloody fingers and bear's feet and bat's wool and adder's tongue, but these were folk names for basic herbs. Like bloody fingers was foxglove and bear's foot was lady's mantle. Bat's wool was moss. Adder's tongue was the dogtooth violet. And so it kind of started to come from that. It was also the fact that, as witches, we believe that words have power and the spells that we do have power, and you don't want to just give that power. It's like giving a loaded gun to somebody that doesn't know how to properly use a gun. So sure. That's also why, there's usually the outer, to actually join a coven, typically you're approached by a high priest or a high priestess because they may have met you at different functions or out and about and think you might be a good fit for the coven. So okay. It's making sure that the power that we have and the power that we wield doesn't fall into irresponsible hands. Okay. So there's always that mystique. There's also, and also Gardner contributed to that too, because in his tradition called gardening, which is the Gardnerian tradition named after him, it was, they do their ceremonies sky-clad or naked, meaning that they're clad in the sky, and that kind of adds a little bit of the ooga booga to it too. But so I mean, not all traditions do it sky-clad, and also covens can be autonomous and decide, no, we're going to wear ceremonial robes and things of that nature. But there's all these different things, and even Hollywood has taken what we do and has made it all dark, mysterious, and creepy and everything like that.
Well, they have with mediumship, they have with spirituality in general in some instances, not all the time, but there is a tendency to take what people don't understand and tweak it in a way that makes it scary or unique or puts additional mystery behind it, or right. Bastardizes it in some way that it's not truly what it's supposed to be.
Right. So I mean, Hollywood's been a factor, and also back when the church was trying to convert everybody to paganism. I mean, you've got even Saint Bridget. Saint Bridget was the goddess, Bridget, and they couldn't get them to quit worshiping her, so they canonized her and made her a saint. So I mean, Saint Bridget was a pagan goddess. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, let's go back, because that's a really good. I think it's a good basis for people to kind of have a general idea about what you do, how you got to today almost. But let's go back a little bit, because you said that you were introduced as a child and from outside the family, it influenced that way. Before that, did you have a kind of a non-denominational upbringing up until that point, or were you raised Christian? Or if you don't mind my being personal?
Please, there's nothing too personal for me, so don't worry about that. I'm pretty much in.
You may regret that. You may regret that statement as we move on, but it's okay.
You know what? I'll take my chances. I've got some good karma. But no, I was actually raised a non-denominational Christian, basically, and I was going to private school, and I decided to become Roman Catholic. So I was the only Roman Catholic in my family. And I did go through all 3 sacraments of initiation. I was baptized. I had my first communion. I was even confirmed. But around the time when I was reaching confirmation, I had always just felt in my heart that, psychic ability was real. I had a feeling that magic was real. I mean, I kind of went through the whole growing up and having adults tell me, oh, this is no longer real. That's no longer real. And I would a part of me knew to just go, oh no, I know, I understand. And in my head going, I don't think that's true. I mean, even in kindergarten, you know, my kindergarten teachers told my parents that I needed to go to pre-first before first grade because I still had imaginary friends and I wasn't properly socializing with the other kids. And really what it was, okay, this little thing that I'm seeing fly over here with the wings is way more interesting than this kid that's eating their boogers, you know? So, I mean, so I think what it is that, you know, I mean, of course, as a kid, I had imaginary friends too,
Sure.
but also some of the things that I were seeing, I think I was seeing like fairies and nature spirits and, you know, I was seeing these things and I knew that they were real, but there was a part of me that knew, don't tell the adults that because they're going to argue with you.
Sure.
So when I was 14, I actually remember I prayed to God and I said, you know, if there's a religion that believes in magic, that believes in psychic ability, and I'm still following something of the light and something that's positive, I was like, I know I'm just one person, but give me a sign. And when I went to school that following Monday, there was this girl that had just come to my school and was only going to my school for 8th grade. And she called my name over and I looked over at her and she had a teen magazine. And when she flipped it around, it said, "Witchcraft is a religion" across the top of the page.
Okay.
And I just kind of nodded and I'm like, okay, why am I nodding like I knew that? And she handed me the article and I was reading the article and they had interviewed this one woman, Lori Cabot, who's a published author of Wicca. And she actually has the title of the official witch of Salem. And she started her own tradition, the Cabot tradition. And at the time she had written a book called Power of the Witch, the Earth, the Moon, and the Magical Path to Enlightenment. So I bought the book, started reading it, was like, okay, this all completely makes sense to me. There's a familiarity to this. It all resonated with me. And then when I turned 16 in high school, I got my first job and in the mall, and I was working in a video store selling movies. And my assistant manager at the time, who's still like my sister, she was born into it, and she was taught by her mother, who was taught by her mother, who was taught by her mother, going back like 300 years all the way back to Ireland. And I was like, now I have someone I can ask questions about the things that I've read, because my basis was Christianity, and I was trying to draw the parallels that I could, and where I couldn't draw the parallels, I could go to them for guidance. Then, or I would read something and be like, okay, well, this is my take on it, and this is what I think on it. And they were telling me, this falls perfectly in line with our family tradition and how we do things. And the interesting thing is that even though in that family it was all passed down mother to daughter, her mom wanted to teach, you know, her son, and he had no interest in learning. And then when I came along with all of these questions, she was like, oh, this was the son the goddess meant for me to teach. And so her and her mom and her sister took me under their wing and taught me their family tradition, and that's where my foundation came from.
Fantastic. Well,
yeah, so I actually had like that white light experience.
Well, I think I want people to know that you also consider yourself clairaudient, correct? You do hear spirit.
I do kind of I give prophetic dreams. I do sometimes, I have psychometry where I can touch something and sometimes pick an impression off of it, and I can read energy. And yes, there are some times where I am clairvoyant and clairaudient. So I can sometimes hear, you know, my spirits, my guides, and I can also sense them and things of that nature.
The reason I want to bring that up is because I think even people listening to the show, I mean, they see Wicca 101 and they may think I'm out promoting Wicca, you know, that I'm trying to endorse something. But really my purpose here today is to try and open up a discussion, because there are lots of parallel areas in spirituality that we all, you know, we all have our journeys, and we all get we're all trying to get to the same place, but there are multiple roads to get there, you know, and I think your road, my road, other people's roads, I think are interesting. So I don't want people to be afraid of it, because I think people I actually know people who would see the term Wicca and will not watch this program because they think that it's going to affect them in some way instead of being educational. And I want them to understand that, you know, nothing bad is going to happen to you because you're watching this video. There's, you know, and
no one's dropped a house on me yet, so obviously I'm doing something right, you know.
But it's funny that people do take it. I'm going to have a show on Santeria. I'm going to have other shows as well. And I want people to understand the purpose of the show is to get people to understand a little bit more that there are more ways of being spiritual than maybe you were brought up or exposed to. And like you tried to find something that resonated with you. that got you to a place in your journey, in your life, that brings you peace and happiness, and a closeness with God and spirit and whatever else.
And
you
my way is
feel.
not
Makes
for
sense.
my way is not for everybody. I even tell people,
Correct.
like, when I teach my classes in magic and spell crafting, I tell people, even if you're taking my class on candle magic, if you see somebody else teaching a class on candle magic, take that class too. All it's going to do is make you better. I don't hold the monopoly on magic. I don't want to be anybody's higher power. That's just way too much responsibility. So,
and I want people to understand. I mean, I feel the same way about what I do as a medium. There are other mediums out there, but I know how I get information. I know how I receive it. I know how I have to translate information when I give it to my clients, or when I'm working, with spirit that I'm trying to either get out of a house if they're causing problems or whatever it happens to be. I don't have the monopoly either. And, it's other people have different ways. You may hear things better than I do, although I hear and I see and I feel, but we all do that in different ways. It's how we're all trying to make this a better place for all of us on this plane until we move on. Now,
right.
So that being said, I wanted to put that out there for the viewers, because I don't want them to feel, strange in some way because of the topic area. This is just, I want them to have the information, because I think the more that we understand one another, and that we're not that different, we're not that far apart on what we're trying to accomplish in the end, but we have different ways of getting there.
Right.
And
You're not going to see me standing on a street corner holding my book of shadows, like, preaching the good word of Gaia or anything, trying to convert anybody.
Exactly. So, but I think it's important that it's said. I think it's important that people understand, what we're doing, and how, what the purpose of the show is, and how you can help people, particularly. And I know that there are people who are watching today who have interest in Wicca. And so, how do we get them to understand a little bit more, and see if this is part of their journey or not? And that's, and that's why I think this series is going to be important on other pagan modalities, I guess, if you want to look at it that way.
Traditions.
Traditions.
I would say traditions.
Okay. So I guess going from where you were at 14 and your journey from that point on, did it sound mysterious to you? Did it scare you at all? Did it, because you had this mentor who kind of brought you under their wing? I mean, she probably was able to.
I was excited. It was bringing me fulfillment, and honestly, there was a familiarity with it. It was like I would read something and understand that this is the first time that I'm reading this, but there was a part of me that already knew and understood what I was reading. So we do believe in reincarnation, because we see that in the cycles too, like, the sheaf grows and then it falls and then the seed grows again and everything like that. And so we believe in reincarnation. So I believe that this is not my first time on Earth, and this was not my first time as a witch either. So I think I came into this life with a lot of soul memory of doing this in the past and doing this in other lifetimes. And to kind of go back to when you were talking about like other stigmas, where, people think of witches and they think of the big conical hat, long green nose, hag riding a broomstick and things of that nature. A lot of that stemmed from like the broom actually being a fertility symbol. And what would happen is there was actually a ritual that they would do where, like, the men would run out to the field with their pitchforks and the women their brooms, and they would go astride them, and they'd be running through the fields, leaping up into the air with them. And it was actually, and the church was saying, oh, they're doing a blight on the harvest, but they wouldn't be doing that because they had to live off of the land and the harvest as well. What it was actually a fertility agricultural ritual to show the seeds how high to grow and to encourage them to grow for growth. There's some theories that, like, the whole green-skinned, hooked-nosed, scraggly-haired woman comes from when women were being tortured into confessing that they were witches, and the green skin was actually where they were beaten black and blue. The hooked nose came from their nose being broken, their hair being ripped out. So she's kind of, in some ways, an icon of the men and women being tortured during the Inquisition. And that's.
But I also think that too, when you're trying to put somebody else down, go to World War II. and how Nazis portrayed different ethnic groups and, you know, in different ways, and tried to make people believe that they were superior in some way to the way that other people looked, and use those characterizations. I think that probably brought into that somewhat as well, that, you know, this is not for you. You don't, this is, you know, this is ugly in multiple ways, you know, and you don't want to be this kind of thing. And
yeah, exactly. And I mean, and that's the thing too, because I also get asked a lot. They're like, well, you don't practice black magic, do you? And that's my other favorite question that I get asked all the time. And see, and part of that also stems from here again, back when the church was a ruling power, and there were people that were praying to God and being promised that their rewards would come to them in the afterlife when they went to heaven. And that was around the time that some people started actually praying to the devil. And so they were categorized as anti-Christian, as non-Christian. And then you had the pagans that were non-Christian, and they kind of got lumped together. But the thing is that the devil doesn't even fit into Wicca, because we don't have a supreme form of evil, nor do we have a supreme form of good. There's a duality and a dual polarity to everything. So everything has a light and a dark. And just because something is dark doesn't mean that it's evil. It's looking at like a shadow aspect of yourself to bring yourself into balance. Because, you know, we have high priest, high priestess, god, goddess, you know, male, female. It's life, death. It's all in a balance. There's always a flip side to everything.
Okay. So I think that's a perfect place to kind of go into, let's talk about some of the commonalities between spirituality and Wicca that people may not understand. And since you kind of straddle, I mean, you are, you know, one of the owners of Love and Light Spiritual Emporium. You service a variety of spiritual needs at your store. So what are some of the commonalities that people may not understand when it comes to Wicca versus, you know, spirituality in another form, mediumship or tarot cards or other things of this nature?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, we can use tarot cards for reading and doing divination. That's entirely possible. You know, that's such an excellent question. Like, it's okay, kind of like when I go into spell crafting and casting spells and doing magic, and people are like, oh, that's so ooga booga, you know, it's like, or they're like, oh, I'm afraid to do that because that might be something evil. The thing is like, when it comes to black magic, white magic, and it seems like every year somebody's coming out with a different color of magic. Really what it is that what makes it good or bad is the intention that you put behind it. We believe that whatever you give out circles back and comes back to you threefold. Okay. So, I mean, in Wicca, they have the Wiccan Rede, which is, and it harm none, do what ye will. You know, like in Christianity, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you.
Basically, or karma.
Yeah. Don't treat people in a way that you wouldn't want them treating you, because the universe is going to bring it back to you. And I personally don't want to be karmically backhanded by a six-armed goddess. You know, that's just not fun for me. You know, but I mean, and that's what it is. It's what's in the heart of the person. You can do spells for yourself. You can do spells for other people. We also, you know, from my family tradition, we won't do a spell for somebody unless we have their permission. We ask them if it is okay, because it's like, you know, you don't want to force your will onto somebody else. You don't want to mess with somebody else's karma. And that's kind of universal across the board. You know, it's, you know, so I even tell people, if somebody's praying to God to smite their enemies, I mean, is that not black magic? You know, and when people say, oh, you believe in lighting a candle is going to do this, and that's ridiculous. It's like, okay, when you go to church and you light a candle in front of Mary for Saint Gertrude in the hospital, you're not calling it candle magic, but that's magic. Yeah. You know, we see the magic and we see the divine in everything that we do. So,
so would you kind of equate magic to prayer in some way?
Yeah, I jokingly, when I teach my classes, I tell people that a spell is basically a prayer with props. I get to play with nice shiny things when I pray. You know, I mean, technically, can we do spells without all of the tools and everything in front of us? Yes, but the purpose that they serve is not only do they have their correspondences to what we're doing, like I may be doing a healing spell, so I may choose to use like a green or a blue candle for that, but it also helps me focus on what it is I'm doing, because I don't want to be thinking about the jerk that cut me off in traffic or the bill that I have to pay. I'm not trying to bring more of that into my life. So by playing with having all the tools and stuff that I'm working with and mixing together and everything like that, a spell is basically a recipe. It's treating gathering together certain things and treating it in a certain way to bring about change. So I tell people what I call a spell, a Christian's going to call the power of prayer, a metaphysician is going to call the law of attraction. In my mind, they're different terms for the same thing.
Okay. So I guess, I think people, for me to equate that with, when I go to see a client, the first thing I do is usually, obviously, clear myself, say a prayer. I sage the house, I sage the area. I try to make the area holy, depending on the energy that I'm working with, or trying maybe to get rid of on occasion, because I do work with a lot of nasty stuff. I use incense from the church. I use other things because of my Catholic tradition and upbringing. I bring a lot of that ritual to what I do, and it does the same thing for me. It gets me centered. It gets me in that place of the divine, where I want to try to make sure that I'm as centered as possible to do the work that I need to do with outside distraction. Because with the spirits that I work with, a lot of times try to distract me. They will open things or close things or make things move to try and take me off my game, so that
once they know you can hear them, they want your undivided attention.
Absolutely. So, I have to get in that space. And a lot of people do that. So I think, what you're saying is absolutely fantastic for people to put into context, so that people are not afraid so much of what you're doing. But I think one of the things that was fascinating to me is doing as much work as I do and traveling. I go to homes to do what I do. It's amazing how many homes I've actually been into to do what I do, where I've seen brooms in windows, and upside down brooms that are on the side, or and it's funny, because the people that I'm going to go see, it could be their neighbors who think because they are gifted, the neighbors get some kind of, have this tradition where they will put a broom. So you might want to explain it, because I have seen that in houses I've gone to. So let's talk about brooms in windows, or, what they mean, because they do mean different things in different positions, correct?
Well, brooms are, like I said, are symbols of fertility. It is also a cleansing tool. Traditionally, the three traditional woods that you would use for like a besom, which is the round broom, because the difference between a besom and a broom is that a broom is made from broom corn, and a besom is made from basically anything else. And the besoms are the rounded brooms, where the flat brooms are the actual brooms. And traditionally, you would use birch for the bristles, because usually birch trees were at the edge of the forest, so it was like an entryway and going in somewhere new. So they were used for like the sweeping and cleansing and bringing in something new. You would actually have them bound with 3 bindings of willow, because willow is a feminine wood and it represented the goddess. And for the 3 bindings, it was the triple goddess, like how in Christianity you've got the divine trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Right. And with witches, we've got the triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Okay. And then the handle would be made of ash wood, representing, again, masculine energy. And a lot of times the end that went into the bristles was cut to be shaped like a phallus. Okay. So it represented the sexual union of God and goddess, and they would actually inject it into the bristles. So that's why it was also used sometimes in marriages, and that you would jump the broom. And with the broom sitting outside the door, well, you would be taking your chance, because sometimes that's something the witch would do, saying, "Don't disturb me, I'm spell crafting." Okay. But in a more mundane sense, sometimes it also meant the husband's away and the wife will play. So, you had a 50-50 chance of either having a lot of fun or being an ingredient. Your choice. So.
Well, and these are the things that could, because, again, I grew up in Ohio in the north, and at the German weddings that I would go to, the broom was part of it, but I don't think anybody really knew. There are a lot of traditions that are out there that people don't know what the actual reason is or where they come from. Like a lot of Christian holidays, or the names of the week, for example, are pagan names, and that's the thing, where they come from. People don't understand that. They just, it's always Thursday, but is it really not Thursday?
Yeah, Thursday was Thor's day. Friday was Freya's day. Saturday was Saturn's day. Yeah. Sunday is the sun's day. And so there's all of that. Also, like talking about marriages, the reason why a lot of marriages happen in June is because Hera, the Greek goddess, who everyone is like, oh, she was the queen of the gods. Well, yes, but she was also the goddess of marriage, and her Roman name is Juno, and the month of June is named after her, which is why a lot of weddings happen in June. There's a lot of things that we do in our everyday
Absolutely.
traditions that have pagan roots to it.
Well, even a lot of the holidays. I mean, Christmas falls on a pagan holiday. There are other things that, there are other holidays that people just don't understand where they come from, the origin. And I think that people, it makes them nervous. It takes them out of their tradition a little bit to understand that. And a lot of them, again, as the church grew, different religions used different pagan holidays because they were already being celebrated anyway. And this is a way to kind of usurp, in a way, that tradition that was already happening.
It was a way to integrate in. It was a way to integrate everything in. So yes, because around Christmas time we had the winter solstice, and the Greeks and the Romans, celebrated Saturnalia, and so a lot of the tradition stemmed from that. With Easter and the rebirth of Christ, I mean, that was Ostara and our spring festival, and it was celebrating the fertility. We were coming out of the winter and coming into spring, and the world was fertile again. So it was new life, new beginnings. So that's when the church decided to celebrate the resurrection of the Christ.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so it was a way of kind of integrating some pagan practices to make it easier for conversion.
I think I think conversion is one, but I think trying to, like you said before, trying to fight some of those traditions was challenging, and it was just easier to go along with the flow and rename something else, so that it just made sense to people. Because again, we're talking a lot of people. The priest was the only educated person in the village most of the time, and and everything came to that central location for information.
They're the intermediary where we're our own connection to the divine. We don't need the intermediary. And
I think that makes some people nervous. Some people aren't comfortable with that, and I think that's, again, one of those things with Wicca that's mysterious, and they don't understand it, because a lot of Christian tradition, you need that. Although, prayer is supposed to be that direct connection, with the divine to talk that direction,
Well, exactly. And there's some people that don't even realize that way back when, like, I mean, the Christian church even used the 5-pointed star, the pentagram. And everyone thinks that the pentagram is a satanic symbol. And no, it's not, because if you actually even look at, like, we actually used to use the inverted and non-inverted pentagram.
Right.
And the inverted is starting to be used again, because it's like a kind of being reclaimed back. But there was a while where we disassociated with it because Anton LaVey had integrated it into the Church of Satan, which is funny, because if you even look into that, they don't actually worship Satan. He just
let's let people know that when they see the pentagram and the point is pointing north, that's not the demonic one. If the points with 2 points pointing north is the one that's considered worship of the devil, correct?
Yes, but the one with the 2 points coming up, we're kind of starting to reclaim that back again, because we do have, see, the thing is like, here again with the depiction of the devil with the horns and everything like that, it's because originally the goddess was fertility and life, and she was agriculture, and the god was the god of the hunt, and so he had stag horns like the animals that they hunted, so he was the horned one. And then he eventually became the Lord of the Forest and the Green Man, because as the goddess and agriculture became more important, her role was more prominent as well. And it's really the fact that, the 5-pointed star actually represents the 4 elements coming together to create the 5th element of spirit. The reason why it's an ancient goddess symbol is because if you actually chart the planet Venus in the sky over an 8-year period of time, the planet moves in the shape of a 5-pointed star.
Okay.
And that's where the goddess correlation with the 5-pointed star came into practice. And then when Christianity adopted it temporarily, they were saying it represented the 5 wounds of Christ on the cross: the crown of thorns, the nails in the hand, and the nails in the feet. Okay. And then eventually they stopped using it, but they did temporarily use it here again as a way of trying to integrate things in and bringing things into their practice.
Sure. Interesting. Mm-hmm. I think most people find this conversation, I hope, fascinating, because there is a basis for, nothing to be afraid of. You haven't talked about anything that's terrifying, or it's just a different tradition. And I want people to come away with this conversation, but I do want to touch on the part that scares people, because before we end here, because I think that's what people, when they think, they see the movies about witchcraft, or they watch a television show, and they see the things that happen there. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit, and talk about, obviously you talked about that, the effect of, you know, the karmic effect perhaps of doing something negative and having that come back at you. But let's talk about why, I guess maybe the question that you get most about black magic.
Oh God. I mainly just get asked, you don't practice it, do you? And I'm like, well, what do you call black magic? But you
So
know,
how would you define black magic versus white magic? I guess
see,
in a general sense, it doesn't have to be a, you know, a textbook definition, but you know, but I would
well,
assume
you know,
that black
that's
magic
where,
would be something that would go against or do something against somebody else, or that may not be in line with what you want to have.
it's basically when you're doing something with the intention to cause harm. See, it's here's the thing, is that technically you can do a spell for anything you want as long as you're willing to pay the price on it, you know.
Okay.
And you know, there are people that, you know, do think they're under psychic attack, and I can tell you in my 20 plus years of, you know, because I'm turning 43 this year, and you know, I've been practicing magic since I was 14, and I can tell you that hexes and curses aren't as common as people would like to believe that they are. I mean, you've got people that like get a hangnail or stub their big toe and they're suddenly screaming psychic attack, you know. Can they happen? Yes. Are they as common as people think they are? No. I think of all the people that think that they're under some kind of a curse or a hex, 10% of them are. And of that 10%, only 10% of them have actually been psychically slammed by somebody. The other 90% think that they're cursed, and because they're thinking about it, they've unintentionally cursed themselves and they're manifesting it. And if they stop putting the thought energy into it, it will stop. So, you know, there are people that are afraid of, oh, do you curse or hex people or any, and no, I mean, do I know how to? Yes. Do I think it's important to know? Absolutely, because if you're going to try to undo something, you need to know how it's been done.
Right.
You know, but it's like, you know, have I attacked people magically? Absolutely, because I was attacked first. It's kind of that whole don't throw the first punch, throw the last, you know. Now, is it as common as I think it is? No, it's not. I mean, I had people sending negative thought forms my way and stuff like that. And yes, and sometimes you got to be careful with that, because sometimes you may actually have somebody sending negative energy at you, or negative thought forms, or even a curse or hex, and they don't even know that they're doing it. They're just really, really angry and don't realize that their anger is manifesting and coming at you. So it's like, you don't really want to be
kind of like poltergeist energy,
to,
what we call poltergeist
right,
energy at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I tell people, don't be so quick to magically retaliate, you know? So I kind of do a 3 structure out kind of rule. Like I'll try to break apart the energy. If it keeps coming, then I might just reflect it back. I won't add to it. I'll just be like, I don't own this. This is yours. And hopefully they'll stop. And then if they're really intending something, then I'm like, okay, duck, because I'm ending this. You know?
And I think what I want people to know too is I have consulted with Chris because when I run into people with different belief systems than mine, or different traditions than mine, I want to respect them when I go and work with them. And as I would somebody of the Jewish faith or Native Americans, I want to honor their tradition when I go and do what I do. And so I have consulted with Chris on a few occasions where I've had people who, and Chris has told me the exact same thing, you know, about that not everybody that feels that they have a curse on them has a curse on them. And it's been enlightening when we've had to consult in that, to work with that energy. And I think that what I want people to know is not to be afraid of it. You know, there are, you know, when I work with people, I want to make sure people are comfortable with what I'm doing. And I think making sure that I incorporate some of that into what I do is helpful in a lot of ways. If I needed, I know that you would come with me if I ever needed specific assistance, you know.
Absolutely.
And that's where I want people who do this type of work, who are light workers. You may not be able to do everything, or you may not be able, you don't know Santeria, or you don't know, you know, Wicca, or you don't know other traditions.
Right.
Don't be afraid to consult. Don't be afraid to learn. Learning anything is not going to harm you. But like you said too, you know, people who use Ouija boards and other things, when I go to see them, Wicca too can be the people, at least, for example, I was in one house was a teenage girl who did, she wanted some guy to love her, and she started doing casting spells and doing all kinds of fun stuff. And that can have repercussions, and sometimes people don't understand the repercussions that they have, and then they want me to come in and clean it up, or Chris to come in and clean it up.
The love spell one is my favorite, where it's like,
exactly.
Oh, I went on this date and I slept with so and so, and now they're not calling me. Well, here, let's play the tape forward to figure out why that's happening. And then they're like, I want to cast a love spell on them. That's cute. Yeah. And then they expect me to tell them how to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not telling you how to do that. And can you cast love magic? Absolutely. But there's a right and a wrong way to do it. I don't force my will upon somebody else. And I tell people, never cast a love spell on somebody, because it never ends well. Because, one way is,
yes, they get obsessive.
They can be obsessive. They can be abusive, because keep in mind, some people want to do this like when they're in their romantic phase. It's like, you're still meeting their representative. You haven't seen what they're like behind the mask. Sure. Or you could be meeting the real person, but then the thing is even if the person's wonderful, then the person who casts the spell starts resenting them, because it's like, well, are you with me because you like me, or are you only with me because I did the spell? And then they get angry at them for something they didn't even do. So it never works out well. Yeah. And I also get asked, no, I don't sacrifice animals. No, I don't sacrifice virgins, and in this day and age, those are way too hard to find anyway. But, I do use blood, but I use my blood. Like, it might be I made like a talisman or something, and I want to connect it to me. So I will actually, maybe prick my finger and put a drop of my blood on it to connect me to that tool or to that talisman or something that I've made. We do use parts of us, but I'm not going to sit here and use somebody else's blood for a spell for me. That's ridiculous. Yeah. So yeah, I those are like a lot of the typical things, like, do you practice black magic? Do you curse people? Can you make somebody fall in love with me? And it's like, and then people are like, well, it is possible to cast a love spell on somebody, isn't it? I was like, well, yeah, but just because something can be done doesn't mean you should. I can jump off the roof of this building and flap my arms to try to fly if I want to. It doesn't make it a good idea.
Sure. Exactly.
Robbie's gonna have something to say.
And I think that's all perfect for people to try and understand. So what's funny to me too, before I moved to South Florida, I didn't realize how large the Wicca community was. But it's a large community here in South Florida. I mean, can you give us an idea of like how many covens there may be, or the size of the community?
No,
it's a lot.
I mean, like, because, okay, yes, I'm a hereditary witch, from this family tradition. I did actually study with the Gardnerian tradition for a while, and I did get initiated to first degree, and I was there for a little while, and I didn't stay and continue my studies just because what I was already doing resonated more with me. But the Gardnerian tradition alone is huge down here. There's a lot of covens, and they're not the only ones. I mean, there's Druids down here. There's when you go closer down to Miami, that's where you have a heavier like Santevian and Afro-Caribbean population. Right. But in South Florida, no, there's various traditions. I mean,
I think it's funny.
That's like asking how many Christian churches are here. I mean, you can't count it.
It's funny because people, they don't understand what they don't see. And because there is no Wicca church, on the corner, it's kind of one of those things that's behind the scenes that people don't realize is actually there. Right. But it's amazing how many homes I go to that are Wiccan homes where, when I go in and I'll see, maybe let's talk about it, because when I go into the home, I will see an altar, and when I go there, and you can tell right away. So I guess, well, because we're running out of time, and this is a fascinating conversation. I guess what can people who are non-Wiccan, what do we say that may be offensive to somebody who is Wiccan?
See, that's hard for me to answer because I don't get offended, because I don't hold inexperience against somebody. It's not that people are stupid, they're just ignorant because they've never been exposed to it. So it's unfair for me to judge them. I mean, I guess it's the whole, because even in the metaphysical community and owning a store, there are people that come in and find out I'm a witch. They're like, oh my God, what? And I'm like,
Sure.
relax. I'm not going to strike you with lightning out of my eyes or anything. But, so there's even, it's kind of interesting because even in the metaphysical and spiritual community, there's still a stigma sometimes when it comes to
Sure.
witches. Or I love hearing the whole, oh, well, yeah, but you're working with lower vibrational energy. And it's like, okay, well, tell you what, I'll invoke a god or a goddess into me, and why don't you explain to them that they're a lower vibration and let me know how that works out for you.
And that's what I think that's why I want this discussion. I think it needs to be had because unless you're exposed in some way, had I not met you, had we not met each other, years ago now, I may not have been exposed. I knew Wiccan people as I have gone through life. I'm older than you are. It's not like I haven't been exposed, but it's not been something that I've come in contact with. Typically in what I've done, the more I've gotten out to do cleansings and banishings and cleansing, getting rid of things, I've had to by necessity come in with other traditions and other religions and other things, obviously. Right. And so I have been open to learning, and that's all I want to make sure people get from this conversation is be open to understanding. And this is a good basis to understand, so that they can take some of the stigma, the fear, or whatever they have away from it a little bit, you're a normal-ish guy. I'm a normal-ish guy.
I must be slipping.
I've never complimented you before. I'm not going to start now. So, okay.
Careful.
Exactly.
No, but that's why I love being a store owner. Like co-owning the business that I own, because it gives me an opportunity to educate people, and that's also why I do classes and workshops, to have what I've learned live on past me.
Sure.
And that's the thing. And the great thing about me teaching is I learn when I teach, because sometimes someone will come in with that fresh perspective or that fresh pair of eyes or this other take that I never even thought of. And it makes me better. I grow and I learn. And so that's super rewarding for me. So I'm just the type of person, and I think there's a fair number of pagans and witches that are the same way, where they welcome questions. They welcome the opportunity to demystify and educate people. And I mean, so people ask me some questions that are kind of out there, but I mean, I don't let it offend me. I mean, it's bringing me spiritual fulfillment. So it's like, if they want to ask me something about my spiritual practice, I don't take it in an offensive way, because if they really want to know, I mean, you're going to have people that are going to be like, oh, well, that's, malarkey or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, just so you know, I'm going to sleep very well at night knowing that you think that. It has no bearing on my practice whatsoever. Sure. I've experienced what I've experienced. This is my truth. And I don't believe that my spiritual practice is for everybody. There are some people that have no business practicing magic because they for whatever reason, they're not emotionally mature enough or whatever and what have you. So that's why there is the mystique, and there will always be the mystique, because we do keep things in our traditions. We do keep things. Sure. There's the basic things that we do share, but like the deeper mysteries do kept secret and kept in the covens, because there's a lot of power in what they do, and you don't want people misusing that.
Absolutely.
We're careful about it.
So is there anything that like maybe one thing that you can impart, if there was something that people are going to take away from this conversation today, what do you think is the one thing that people should know from this conversation?
Witches are just, we're normal people. I mean, we do practice magic. We do have different beliefs. It was kind of like, try to find the commonality, because it's like when I came out of the broom closet, so to speak, to my family, they didn't get it. And they were all hung up on, wait, you don't believe in God and Jesus? And so I took one of my crystals and I actually set it on the table. And I said, okay, look, if there were a bunch of people sitting around this crystal and describing what they saw, I said, would there be variations? And they're like, yeah. I said, but there'd be similarities, right? And they're like, yes. And I said, and it's the same crystal, correct? And they're like, yeah. I said, okay, so if this is God and we're all the different world religions, you're on the monotheistic side where you're seeing the whole crystal. I'm sitting here on the pagan side where I'm seeing every bump and crevice that makes the crystal, but it's the same source. I'm just seeing it in multiple facets. So where you're just praying to God, I might be praying to the war aspect of God, or the, love aspect of God or goddess or whatnot. I mean, my family tradition, we tend to be very goddess oriented, so we tend to refer to the divine and the feminine.
Okay.
I mean, well, if you want something done right the first time, you ask a woman because they'll actually read the instructions. But
or get directions.
Exactly. I mean, I've said it before. A woman's place is in charge. That's why I'm a goddess worshiper. So, but no, we see the divine in everything, and we can find the divine and the magic in everything. And I mean, anything done with intention is a magical act. Washing the dishes can be a magical act, and you have the magic, you have the divine within you. It's like the story of the teacher that sent his disciples to find the one truth, and they wanted to know who found the one truth. He said, not one pearl in the ocean is the one truth, but it's the string that makes them a necklace. It's the one truth. We all have the truth in our spiritual practices. You just got to get through the coal to get to the diamond, because when you get to the core, we're all saying the same thing. Be good to each other and treat each other well.
No, I think that's a perfect way. It's brought us full circle to where we started. With what we wanted to try to accomplish today. So I appreciate that and getting us.
You were right. There are cycles. I'm just kidding.
So where can people find you? So how can they contact you if they want to learn more and about the classes? So tell us a little bit more how people can find you.
Well, they can come to the store, Love and Light Spiritual Emporium. I usually work here in the evenings, and everyone here knows me and can tell people how to contact me. I do teach classes here, and I usually schedule them here at the store. I can also.
What's the website, Chris?
The website to the store is lovelightspiritualemporium.com. Or they can
everything that you're doing will be listed there, so they can find it.
It'll be listed there on our calendar of events. Also, I do private classes as well. If there's a group of people, I do private classes. I had 2 women that were going out of town and couldn't do one of my classes, and so we found a time the store was available, and I taught the class here at the store. So if you even have a group of like anywhere from minimum 4 or higher, I can even schedule a class with just people and their friends if they want to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it so much. Before we leave here, just a couple of one for everyone who is gay out there. Happy Pride. I do want to say that while we're still in June. And also, a good friend of mine, Rosie Shapiro, is doing a show on the 28th. But I just want people to know that that show is also being done for. There's a charity aspect of her show, where a portion of that is going to be donated to help buy gas cards for people who have cancer and need to get back and forth to their chemo treatments. So if you can go in and support the charity, that would be lovely as well. And her show is on the 28th, so you can look her up, rosishapiro.com. Please check out all the other. I've been a junkie for the Enlightened World Network this week. I've seen so many shows and have been introduced to so many interesting aspects that have been on Enlightened World Network this week. Please check out the other programming on here. So I want to thank Ruth and Terry and Deb and everybody else that I've been watching this week. You've been, and Wendy out there in the UK. I appreciated your show and the kind words. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will be taking additional shows. We're going to be talking about Santeria. If you have questions for Chris or that we didn't discuss today, because this is, again, the 101. If we need a 102, I'm sure Chris will be available, or I'll cajole him into doing another show here. And I
would love to be back. So if you ever have me back, getting me to talk isn't the problem. It's getting me to shut up.
and we'll do another show. So if you have questions, comments, and there's something you want to focus in on, let us know. We'll be happy to do that. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, and have a great week. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Have a good night.